Well, here we have a video on what I'll call a transitional year for Buick, the 1974 Buick Electra Limited four-door hardtop that we're going to talk about today. And this one is finished in a color that I believe is called nutmeg metallic. How appropriate for this very 70s era period correct color. Now, for 1974, the front end of the Buicks was redesigned, and it really had been redesigned a little bit every year since its introduction in 1971. And the 74, I say, little bit wonky in that it still has these round headlamps. 1975 would go to the rectangular headlamps, but they're housed in square pods, as you can see here. So I guess designers were trying to visually transition people to the square, rectangular, I guess I should call them, headlamps. And in addition to that, for whatever reason, they're spaced out. There's that gap in between them. I don't know how I feel about that gap. Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. But you do have that up front. This car also has the lamp monitors that you can see in the front fenders. And of course, you have the stereotypical egg crate grille because, as you know by now and watching this channel, egg crate connotes luxury. I do like that how the grille spills out all the way across the sides of the Sedan, gives you that look of width because the car isn't wide enough as it is. And in fact, the egg crate, as we're going to see, does indeed spill over to the side and kind of sits in front of the cornering lamps. But just take a look and notice how many ins and outs this particular hood and header panel have. I mean, you have the fender kind of stepping up in the shoulder where it steps up to the prow on the hood. You have the crease running down the midline of the hood. You have the crease that runs cross-car and goes above the headlamps. And I would say, this is Avery, different kind of front end from some other GM divisions from the time in some ways. A lot of GM divisions like Pontiac, as an example, had the fender sit. The edge of the fender sit a little bit higher than the area in between that fender top and the hood prow. Here you can see that area, that landing area, is pretty flat. There is no fender peak. It just kind of starts relatively low and then crests up into the prow of the hood. So Buick was doing something a little bit different here, and I think it looks pretty good on this car. Let's rotate around now to the front 3-arter view and discuss more. As we look at this front 3-4 view, you can see, as I mentioned, that wall-to-wall ice cube-like grille extends over to the side. It wraps over the side. This car does have the optional cornering lamps, and that's that big white block up at the top. By the way, cornering lamps were first introduced by Cadillac in 1962. So by this point, they had been in the industry for a little bit of time, but I think this is a tasteful execution. You do have that kind of typical Buick body side molding that is diving down at this point, as well as this beautiful body side feature that comes off of the hood. Notice it starts at the leading edge of the hood, or in fact the header panel, and then goes rearward. That's the shoulder that creates the prow of the hood, and as it goes rearward, you have the 4 ventiports. Of course, you have 4, because this is an Electra and an upper-end car there, right in that shoulder. And then that feature continues and kind of crests downward as it heads rearward on the vehicle. Very nice line overall, and you do have the very flush glass of these 4-door hardtops. Notice how flush that glass is. Of course, this is headerless glass. There is no door header here and there is no B-pillar on this car. But the overall look between the side glass and the front windshield with those toothpick A-pillars is something that really wasn't replicated on many cars until I would say modern day. Oftentimes, designers would try to emulate this flesh glass in the 80s and 90s by blacking out the trim around it, but didn't quite have the same look as you have here. This looks beautifully executed. The only downside, I will say, from owning these cars is that because the glass is headerless and super heavy, if you only have the window partially down and then you open and close the door, the glass kind of rattles. And it also, when you open the door, the glass tips back in. It's kind of interesting. I don't think the quality was all that great on these, but, oh well. It does look good when the glass is up. And as we rotate around to the side of the car, you can see that diving line, that feature line that I was mentioning before, as well as the diving body side molding. I almost wish the body side molding wasn't on this car. And I wish the door edge guards were gone, but oh well. That's what this particular customer ordered. It does have the road wheels, those beautiful Buick wheels on this car. The rocker moldings are relatively wide, especially in the midsection of the car, and gives it a little bit more of a slimming look for what is a very large car. Part of the slimming look, I think, is due to the fact that the glass area is so big, and the rocker molding is so, let's say, pronounced that the body side doesn't look overly huge. Take a look, as an example, at the rear quarter where the lower molding is much smaller and the quarter, the top of the quarter is clearly higher than the belt line is around the door area. So that quarter looks significantly larger. The other thing you notice in this particular photo is despite the 127-inch wheelbase, this massive wheelbase for this car, take a look at that rear overhang. Huge rear overhang, and you also have a very stereotypical GM styling trait, and that is that SE pillar is kind of in line with the rear wheel. That was something that GM design did for many years. Other design teams that other automakers did as well, but something that you often found on these GM cars. Now, out back, you'll notice what I think is not a very pretty view of this car. The front is interesting, but the rear is marred by these fender extensions. This was, of course, the days of the 5 mph impact standard. Bumper on the rear here is huge. But I don't think that the execution doesn't look nearly as nice as it did when the designers penned this. And that's because those rubber flubber extensions never quite fit right. These appear to have been replaced. And I'm not surprised because by this point, they're 50+ years old and cracking. And the replacements just never quite look right. You can tell the paint match is a little bit off, but close enough. Looks better than not having them there. Now, you do have some interesting features too. Out back. Notice the deck lid has this inverted barbell theme, I guess I'll call it, with a scalloped out sections on either side of the deck lid and a raised section in the middle. And it, of course, folds over and meets these, well, nearly wall-to-wall tail lights, interrupted by the license plate. Wall-e-wall tail lights would be something that had been a Buick hallmark since the early 1960s and then would continue on for many years even on cars like the Riata in the 1980s. So you see here a very typical Buick, like trade-out back. Now let's move to the interior on this particular Electra, and you'll see it's a similar brown shade or nutmeg shade. But you do have the Lombardy cloth here and a divided and optional divided front bench seat as well as a power driver seat, at least there. I love the Lombardy cloth. I think it's pretty cool. I would pick cloth over leather in any of these, and Buick always use very durable cloth. Now you'll notice also that the Buick instrument panel still has a very similar look to the 1971-73 models. Some of the other GM divisions had redone their dashes in 1974, including Cadillac as well as Automotive. But Pontiac did not for 1974, and Buick did not. So you do have a very similar dash. Buick redo theirs in 1975. There are some differences. You do have the silver with black numerals speedometer, which was, I don't know, something that only lasted a very brief period of time. Cadillac did a similar thing, and I guess it was a fad that came and went about as fast as it arrived. Now you also have something very Cadillac-y in that notice, the steering wheel here. This is actually a Cadillac wheel that Buick seemingly repurposed. And Buick would do that a couple times. They would also repurpose the 1975-76 Cadillac 3-spoke steering wheel too. So, I guess they thought they'd save some money and customers wouldn't know. And to be honest, they're probably right. Also, notice here, one of my favorite features about Buicks is they had supersized accelerator pedals. And every GM division, for whatever reason, had a different accelerator and brake pedal. I guess they thought that was critical for them to design their own accelerator and brake. Cadillac had one that was hinged at the bottom. Oldsmobile and Buick had these floating pedals that were just huge. Not quite sure why, but I do think it's an interesting trait of GM cars of this era. And let me just show one more picture of this super comfortable Lombardy cloth interior. Look at those little rib sections that are divided into 3 on the seat back. I think it's just a cool interior. And the super puffy padded area that's around the door poles. Of course, in this particular year, this is an Electra Limited. There was the Electra, there was the Electra Custom, and there was the Electra Limited. So there actually were 3 trim levels of the Electra. By the way, When you upgraded from the Electra to the Electra Custom, you got, amongst other things, door pull handles. Wow. And if you got the Electra Limited like you have here, you also got an electric clock. Wow. I mean, you were talking luxury now, but pretty much everything else was optional in these cars. And this one has quite a few options. You can also notice the tilt telescoping wheel here. Again, robbed from Cadillac. And here you have the speedometer that I was talking about, the kind of black on silver type look. It's a classy look. I suspect that it kind of came and went because it was a bit harder to read than white on black and white numerals on a black background, but at least it looks cool, and I don't think it's that hard to read, especially doughy.